In 1907, you were a teenager with a sketchbook and a dream. By 1941, 3 million soldiers were crossing into Soviet Russia on your orders. This is the story of the most hated man in history. His name, Adolf Hitler. Chapter 1. The Rejection. It is 1907. You are 18 years old. You carry a portfolio into the Academy of Fine Arts in Vienna, and you wait. The admissions board takes 11 minutes. They hand you a letter, and you walk back out into the street. Insufficient artistic talent. But you don't see it. Your art looked too perfect. You stand on the cobblestones and feel something harden inside your chest. Not sadness, something colder. You tell yourself they missed something, that the world has made a mistake about you. Here is what matters about that moment. Most people who face rejection ask one question: what do I need to change? You ask a different one: why did they fail to see me? That difference between turning inward and turning against is not dramatic. It does not feel like a fork in the road. It feels like a thought, a quiet, private thought that protects you from pain. But that thought will outlive 40 million people. Chapter 2. The Drift. Your mother dies in 1907. The money runs out. The future you imagined dissolves. You move through Vienna with no direction. Hostels, cheap rooms. You paint postcards of city buildings and sell them to tourists for enough to survive. You are not starving. You are invisible. And for a man who believes he was meant for greatness, invisibility feels like a second rejection. So you start reading newspapers, political pamphlets, angry ideas written by angry men about a nation being undermined from within. Gordon Allport, the Harvard psychologist who spent decades studying prejudice, identified this pattern in 1954 in his landmark work, The Nature of Prejudice. He called it scapegoating, the most psychologically efficient response to personal failure. It converts shame, which is directionless and paralyzing, into anger, which has a target. It converts helplessness into purpose. It does not require evidence. It only requires a story that feels useful. You find that story, and it fits perfectly over the wound that Vienna left behind. Chapter 3. The War. August 1914. Germany goes to war. You enlist the next morning. For the first time in your life, you have structure, a uniform, orders, men around you who share the same purpose. You are no longer the failed artist from Vienna. You are a soldier with a function and a place. You serve on the Western Front as a dispatch runner, carrying messages through artillery fire. You are wounded twice. You are awarded the Iron Cross First Class, a decoration rarely given to men of your rank. For 4 years, you are not invisible. Then it ends. November 1918. You are in a military hospital, temporarily blinded after a gas attack, when the news arrives. Germany has surrendered. Richard Landes, a historian at Boston University who spent decades studying political violence, described what happens next as the collapse of the heroic narrative. The moment when the story a person has built their entire identity around is destroyed and nothing is offered to replace it. Most people survive it. They grieve. They rebuild. They find another story. You do not rebuild. You decide Germany did not lose. Germany was betrayed. And once anger has a direction, it is very easy to organize. Chapter 4. The Voice. Munich, 1919. The army assigns you to observe a small political group, 40 members, a back room in a beer hall. You go to listen, but then you speak, and the room goes quiet in a way it did not go quiet for anyone else. You are not polished. You are not offering complexity or nuance or policy. What you are is certain, absolute, volcanic. You speak for 30 minutes without notes, and people lean forward. Robert Cialdini, a social psychologist at Arizona State University, spent decades studying the mechanics of influence. His conclusion: in conditions of uncertainty, people do not search for the most accurate voice. They search for the most confident one. Confidence reads as knowledge. Certainty reads as safety. Germany in 1919 has lost a war, watched its currency collapse so completely that a wheelbarrow of banknotes cannot buy a loaf of bread. An entire generation of men came home from the trenches to unemployment and humiliation. These people do not want complexity. They want someone who sounds like he already knows the outcome. You give them that. And the crowds grow. First dozens, then hundreds, then thousands, filling outdoor squares. Not because you are saying something new, because you are saying it like a man who cannot be wrong. Chapter 5. The Machine. January 1933. You are appointed Chancellor of Germany. Not dictator, not emperor, Chancellor. That is what makes it important. The nightmare does not arrive with a single dramatic moment. It enters through paperwork, politics, fear, and opportunity. Joseph Goebbels takes control of every newspaper, every radio station, every film studio in the country within months. The message does not change. It gets amplified, cleaned, professionalized, broadcast into every living room, every classroom, every barracks. And even the symbols are rebuilt. The symbol you choose is ancient. The swastika had existed for thousands of years across Hindu, Buddhist, and Jain traditions as a symbol associated with spirituality, prosperity, and sacred balance. You take that symbol, strip it from its original meaning, rotate it, militarize it, and fuse it into a new political mythology. One of history's oldest sacred symbols becomes permanently associated in much of the world with industrialized hatred. The machine does not just control information, it controls emotion, repetition, identity, belonging. A message repeated enough times stops feeling like propaganda, it starts feeling like common sense. Hannah Arendt, the political philosopher who covered the Nuremberg trials and later wrote Eichmann in Jerusalem, called what followed the banalization of evil, the process by which ordinary people with ordinary moral frameworks are enrolled into atrocity, not through dramatic conversion, but through small, incremental steps, each one barely distinguishable from the last. A new law, a new category, a new restriction, each arriving as a logical extension of what came before. One newspaper disappears, one teacher is replaced, one group becomes different, one punishment becomes acceptable, one fear becomes useful. The country does not change all at once. It changes, step by step. And by the time people understand where the steps are leading, many have already helped build the path. Chapter 6. The Word Before the Act. September 1935. No violence yet, just paper. Jewish citizens are stripped of citizenship by law. The category German is legally redefined to exclude roughly 500,000 people who considered themselves German their entire lives. Marriage between Jews and non-Jews criminalized. Employment, education, public life, all of it restricted by paperwork. But the paperwork does not appear from nowhere. Before the law, there is the idea. For years, you have told people that Jews are not just citizens, neighbors, scientists, teachers, shopkeepers, or families. You tell them they are a hidden enemy, a poison inside the nation, the reason for humiliation, the reason for decay, the reason Germany suffers. That is what makes the law possible. James Waller, professor of Holocaust and Genocide Studies at Keene State College, documented how mass atrocity across the 20th century in Germany, Rwanda, Cambodia, Bosnia followed the same sequence every time. First, categorize, then marginalize, then dehumanize through language, then normalize through law. Then violence becomes conceivable because the target has already been reclassified as something outside the circle of normal human concern. This is the part people miss. Atrocity does not begin when the killing begins. It begins earlier. It begins when people accept the idea that some lives matter less. Later, this logic will become deportations, camps, mass shootings, gas chambers. But the moral permission begins here, on paper. And by the time the killing starts, most people have already been living with that idea long enough that it feels like common sense. Chapter 7. The names. Here is where the story stops being abstract. Albert Einstein is in California when you become chancellor. He reads the news. He resigns from the Prussian Academy of Sciences, donates his savings to anti-fascist organizations, and writes privately to friends that he will never set foot in Germany again. His books are burned in public squares. His name appears on lists of enemies of the state, but Einstein is the famous example. Behind him are hundreds of thousands of people whose names history does not repeat nearly as often. Scientists who stopped publishing, teachers who disappeared from classrooms, families who packed everything into 2 suitcases and crossed a border they would never cross back. And behind them are the ones who did not make it out. People who waited too long, people who had nowhere to go, people who believed it could not possibly get worse. History remembers Einstein because we recognize the name. The real horror is the number of people who were never famous enough to be remembered at all. Chapter 8. The Bunker. April 1945. Berlin is burning. You can hear it 50 feet beneath the earth. The walls shake. Dust falls from the ceiling. The bunker does not stop the sound of the city dying above you. But Berlin did not begin burning in 1945. Go back 6 years. It is 1939, and you are the most powerful man on earth. Poland falls in 35 days. France, the nation that held Germany for 4 years in the last war, falls in 6 weeks. You send 3 armored divisions through the Ardennes forest, the route the French declared impassable, and their entire defensive plan collapses behind them. On June 23, 1940, you stand at the Eiffel Tower at dawn. You could have bombed Paris. The Luftwaffe had the range. The orders were ready. But when the French government fled and Paris was declared an open city, you gave a different instruction. Leave it standing. Paris was everything you had wanted to be and never were. The museums, the boulevards, the architecture the failed art student from Vienna had studied in postcards for years. Warsaw had been leveled. London was being bombed. But Paris, you wanted to own it, not destroy it. Denmark, Norway, Belgium, the Netherlands, Yugoslavia, Greece. One by one, the flags come down and the swastika goes up. The map of Europe fills with your color. Then you look east. You have always planned to go east. In your book, written 20 years earlier, you wrote that Germany's future was Lebensraum, living space in the east. The Slavic people would be pushed aside or destroyed. The land would feed Germany for 1,000 years. On June 22, 1941, you launch Operation Barbarossa. 3 million soldiers cross into Soviet territory along a front 2,000 miles wide, the largest land invasion in human history. At first it works. Cities fall in days. The Soviet Air Force is destroyed on the ground in 48 hours. At Kiev, your army encircles and captures 660,000 men in a single battle. The maps fill with arrows moving east, east, east. But the Soviet Union is not France. France is the size of Texas. The Soviet Union is the size of a different planet. Autumn turns the roads to mud. Vehicles sink to their axles. Fuel sits 200 miles behind the front. Then winter arrives, minus 40 degrees. Your army is dressed for autumn because the campaign was supposed to be over in 12 weeks. Engines freeze. Rifles jam. Frostbite claims more men than bullets in some divisions. Your generals warn you. You tell them to push harder. On December 5, 1941, General Georgy Zhukov launches a Soviet counterattack outside Moscow with fresh Siberian divisions equipped for winter. For the first time in the war, your army retreats. You relieve every general who suggests pulling back. No retreat, you say. Stand and fight. The war that was supposed to end in 1941 bleeds into 1942, then 1943, then 1944. Stalingrad ends it. In the winter of 1942, you send 300,000 men into the city on the Volga, the city bearing Stalin's name. It becomes a battle of buildings, of single rooms changing hands 4 times a day. Your generals beg permission to break out before the encirclement closes. You say no. When General Friedrich Paulus asks to surrender, you promote him to field marshal instead. No German field marshal has ever surrendered. In February 1943, Paulus surrenders anyway. 91,000 soldiers walk into Soviet captivity. Fewer than 6,000 will ever return to Germany. The myth of invincibility is over. The Soviet army begins moving west, slowly, then faster, then like a tide that cannot be stopped. Now it is April 1945. You sit 50 feet underground moving imaginary armies across maps, issuing orders to divisions that no longer exist. The generals who come down the stairs carry the same expression. The war is over. You blame the generals. You blame the German people for lacking the will. You blame the Jews, the communists, the traitors within, because admitting the truth would mean admitting something heavier, that the war was lost at Moscow, that it was lost at Stalingrad, that 3 million soldiers died for a plan broken from the beginning, too vast, too far, too dependent on roads that didn't exist, and that the decisions that broke it were yours. But the story still protects you, even here, even now, even in a bunker beneath a burning city, surrounded by the consequences of everything you chose. Chapter 9. The Warning. Here's the question people still get wrong. They ask how one man did this. One man did not do this alone. You provided the story. Millions of people provided everything else. Some gave loyalty. Some gave silence. Some gave paperwork. Some gave enthusiasm. Some looked away because looking directly would have cost them something. Philip Zimbardo, the Stanford psychologist who spent decades studying how ordinary people participate in extraordinary harm, concluded something that is still uncomfortable to say out loud. The line between people who do good and people who do terrible things is not primarily a line of character. It is a line of circumstance. Give ordinary people permission. Remove accountability. Provide an enemy to blame. Surround them with others doing the same thing, and many will participate. Not all, but many. None of these arrived overnight. They arrived gradually. One speech, one law, one compromise, one justification, then another, and another, until the things that once seemed impossible begin to feel normal, until the things that once required an explanation no longer need one. That is not a story about Germany. That is a story about how human systems work when no one stops to ask, where is this going? The people who stopped it were ordinary people too. A civil servant who refused to sign one document, a soldier who didn't fire, a neighbor who said nothing publicly but hid a family in a cellar, a journalist who kept one copy of one record. Ordinary people on both sides of the line. Circumstance alone doesn't explain everything, but circumstance explains more than we want it to. Chapter 10. The death. The night before your death, you marry Eva Braun. She has been with you for years. While Berlin collapses above the bunker, a small wedding ceremony takes place underground. Witnesses sign documents. Champagne is served. For a few brief moments, the war feels far away. The next day, you reach for the pistol on the table. Your hand is steady. You have already bitten down on the cyanide capsule. You can feel the poison spreading, fast, then cold. You place the barrel against your temple and pull the trigger. It is April 30th, 1945, 3:30 in the afternoon. Your body is carried outside by the men who remain. It is wrapped and placed in a bomb crater in the garden of the Reich Chancellery. Gasoline is poured over it. A match is lit. Above you, Berlin is in ruins. The empire that was supposed to last 1,000 years lasted 12. You never got into art school. That is still the fact at the center of it all. A 19-year-old with a dream of painting. The Vienna Academy of Fine Arts, 1907. Rejected. Then rejected again. You became a soldier, then a speaker, then a party leader, then the ruler of Germany, then the commander of armies that stretched across an entire continent. And it ends here, in a bunker, in a garden, in a fire. The war ends 8 days later. The regime falls. The architects of what happened are put on trial at Nuremberg, where for the first time in history, a court attempts to hold a government legally accountable for what it did to its own people and to the world. Some are executed, some spend the rest of their lives in prison, some escape and live out quiet decades in other countries, in other names. The 20th century moves forward carrying the weight of everything that happened before this moment, and your name becomes something that people lower their voices to say. Not everywhere, but in most places. Germany banned it. Austria banned it. Many countries across Europe made it illegal to display your salute in public. The swastika, the symbol your movement built its identity around, is prohibited by law in 16 countries. Your image cannot be sold in most of Europe. Your book was banned for decades before being republished with academic annotations, so historians could study it in context. But your face is still recognized instantly across the world. 80 years later, no introduction, just the image, and everyone knows. Just not the way you planned.